Hi and welcome to my AQA GCSE biology revision session. So I'm going to do some work on paper 1 prep because some of you have got some mocks coming up. So the first thing you need to note is what's the difference between the two types of cells. So this is a prokaryotic cell. Now there are some key features that you need to know. The cytoplasm, for example, the single DNA loop not enclosed in the nucleus, the plasmids, which are extra rings of DNA. So that could be single as a plasmid or lots of plasmids, just depending on the prokaryotic cell. The cell membrane, the cell wall, which is not made up of cellulose, and the ribosome. So these are key features that distinguish prokaryotic organisms. So important, the bits in red. If we're looking at prokaryotic cells, this single DNA loop is not enclosed in a nucleus, because the minute we jump to eukaryotic cells or animal and plant cells, the first thing we distinguish is the fact that there is a nucleus present. The genetic material is contained within that nucleus in eukaryotic cells. Now, the prokaryotic cell was circular. The eukaryotic cell has linear, which basically means long chromosomes. Then we note our cytoplasm is also present. Now, this is the site of chemical reactions. So the cell membrane then is a barrier, and that barrier is controlling the movement of substances in and out of the cell. So the cell membrane was present in the prokaryote as well as the eukaryote. We also had ribosomes, and your ribosomes are your site of protein synthesis. So it's important to note that these distinguishing features are present in whether we're looking at prokaryotes or eukaryotes. Right now, the only distinguishing feature is the presence of a nucleus and the genetic material. So the next thing we need to talk about is the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria is a site of aerobic respiration. The mitochondria is very small, and the other thing we have present in plant cells that distinguish it from animal cells is the presence of chloroplasts. So this is the site of photosynthesis. And then we have the cell wall. Now, the cell wall is the part that strengthens the cell and is supportive. So therefore, if we understand that the cell wall, which is made up of cellulose, that is a distinguishing feature between a plant cell and an animal cell. And then the last thing to note when we look at plant cells is the permanent vacuole. Now, the permanent vacuole contains cell sap, and this is what keeps the cells rigid to allow for this support. So the fact that the cell wall is present for support and the fact that the permanent vacuole will be filled with the cell sap keeps this rigidity of the cell, and therefore the shape of the cell for plant cells is very different to that of animal cells. So one of the key things we need to identify is the difference in size. So we can quite clearly see that the prokaryotic cell is very small. It's about 1 micrometers in diameter. Now, if you look at the mitochondria and you look at the chloroplast, you'll see that they are very small too. So these are subcellular components of eukaryotic cells. So when you are comparing them, you need to consider the size. So what type of question could they ask you? Well, the type of question they could ask you is about what's the similarities between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells? Well, our prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have cell membrane, they have the cytoplasm, they have DNA, genetic material, and they have ribosomes. Now, I haven't gone into any detail about the DNA or genetic material, so therefore it is a similarity. They both have genetic material. If it were to ask me, well, what's the differences between the prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cell? Well, what I'd be looking for is the fact that their size is different. The eukaryotic cell is much larger than the prokaryotic cell. The DNA is shaped differently, i.e. in the prokaryotic cell, it's a loop, whereas in the eukaryotic cell, it's linear. Whether or not there is the presence or absence of something. Now, it's really important in a question, when they give you a picture, you describe what you can see. Is there a nucleus present? If there's a nucleus present, you say the eukaryotic cell has a nucleus, whereas the prokaryotic cell does not. If you can see structures, i.e. the eukaryotic cell has subcellular structures, organelles, the mitochondrion, you can see this, you say that it's present in the eukaryotic cell, but not in the prokaryotic cell. If the plasmid is present in the prokaryotic cell, you say the plasmid is present in the prokaryotic cell, but not in the eukaryotic cell. And if they're comparing an animal cell to a prokaryotic cell, you would say the prokaryotic cell has a cell wall, but the eukaryotic cell, the animal cell, does not. If it was showing you a plant cell, you would say the prokaryotic cell has a cell wall that is not made up of cellulose, whereas the eukaryotic plant cell has a cell wall which is made up of cellulose.